The night Lillian Blackthorne heard her husband whisper another woman's name in his sleep, something inside her died, and something else was born. For 2 years she'd endured being invisible in her own home, a ghost haunting the corridors of Ironvale Manor, while Duke Adrian Blackthorne mourned a love he'd lost before their forced marriage. But that night, listening to him call out for a dead woman while his living wife stood 3 feet away, Lillian made a decision that would shake the foundations of their world. This is her story, a tale of survival, dignity, and the courage to demand more than mere existence. If you're ready to witness how one forgotten duchess reclaimed her power and brought a frozen duke to his knees, stay with us until the end. And if this story moves you, let us know which city you're watching from in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button. The first snow of late autumn fell on Ironvale Manor like ash from a funeral pyre. Lillian Blackthorne stood at the window of her private chambers, private not by choice but by abandonment, watching the gray sky deposit its cold burden onto the estate grounds. Behind her, a fire crackled in the hearth, but its warmth never quite reached her bones. Nothing in this house had warmed her in the 2 years since she'd arrived as a bride. 24 years old, and already she felt ancient. Already she felt erased. The servants moved through the corridors like whispers, averting their eyes when they passed her. They knew. Everyone knew. The Duchess of Ironvale was a title without substance, a position without power, a wife without a husband in any way that mattered. "Your Grace, shall I bring your breakfast here again?" Mary, her lady's maid, spoke softly from the doorway, her voice carrying that particular tone of pity that Lillian had learned to recognize and hate. "Yes, Mary, thank you." Lillian didn't turn from the window. If she looked at Mary's kind face, she might crack, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't crack anymore. Not after last month, when she'd found herself weeping in the rose garden like some gothic heroine from a penny novel. She was better than that. She had to be. The door closed with a soft click, and Lillian was alone again. Always alone, even in a house filled with 73 servants, a husband, and enough rooms to house a small village. The isolation of Ironvale Manor wasn't geographic, it was emotional, architectural, a carefully constructed prison of social convention and one man's deliberate indifference. Duke Adrian Blackthorne. Even thinking his name made her chest tighten. Their wedding had been a business transaction orchestrated by their families, his need for an heir and an alliance, her family's need for the social elevation and financial security that came with a ducal connection. She'd known it wasn't a love match. She'd never expected poetry or passion, but she'd hoped, foolishly, for basic human kindness, for partnership, for the possibility that affection might grow from proximity and shared purpose. Instead, she'd gotten a masterclass in calculated absence. Adrian managed his avoidance with military precision. He took his breakfast at dawn, before she woke. He dined at his club in town or in his study, never the formal dining room where place settings for two sat eternally unused. When circumstances forced them into the same space, receiving lines at balls, occasional dinners with visiting nobility who expected to see the Duke and Duchess together, he would position himself at maximum distance, his body angled away from her, his eyes fixed on some point just past her left shoulder, never on her face, never meeting her eyes. It was as if looking at her directly might turn him to stone. "I understand you're hosting the Harvest Ball this year," Lady Cromwell had said to her last month at the theater, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "How lovely! Though I must say, I've never seen a couple maintain such separate courts. Rather medieval, isn't it?" The other women in their box had tittered behind their fans, and Lillian had smiled that placid, empty smile she'd perfected, the one that gave nothing away, the one that said she was perfectly content in her strange, cold marriage. But she wasn't content. She was drowning. The manor itself seemed to reflect Adrian's rejection. Her rooms occupied the east wing, his the west, with 50 yards of corridor and a lifetime of emotional distance between them. The servants had divided their loyalties accordingly, though most fell into Adrian's orbit by default. He was, after all, the sun around which Ironvale turned. She was merely a distant, irrelevant moon. Lillian pressed her forehead against the cold window glass. Beyond the grounds, the village of Thornwick huddled against the coming winter. smoke rising from hundreds of chimneys. Normal people, leading normal lives, probably sitting down to breakfast with spouses who actually acknowledged their existence. She'd tried everything to bridge the chasm between them. In the first months, she'd waited up for him, sitting in the drawing room with needlework she didn't care about, hoping he might join her for evening tea. He never came. She'd ordered his favorite dishes prepared for dinner, only to have the servants report that His Grace had dined at his club. She'd learned about his interests, estate management, agriculture reform, breeding programs for his prized horses, and attempted to engage him in conversation during the rare moments they occupied the same room. The harvest numbers look promising, she'd ventured once, after spending hours studying the estate ledgers. Indeed. He'd turned a page of his newspaper, dismissing her. The new irrigation system you implemented has, if you'll excuse me, I have correspondence to attend to. He'd risen and left, his untouched brandy still sitting on the side table, as if even his drink found her company unbearable. After 6 months, she'd stopped trying to engage him. After a year, she'd stopped expecting him to change. After 18 months, she'd stopped hoping for anything at all. She'd simply existed. A decorative element in his house, like the suits of armor in the Great Hall or the ancestral portraits lining the gallery. Beautiful, expensive, utterly irrelevant. The breakfast tray arrived and Lillian forced herself to eat, though the food tasted like ash. She'd lost weight, she knew. Her dresses hung looser, and her wedding ring, that thick gold band she'd placed on her finger 2 years ago with such naive optimism, now slipped and turned, too large for her thinning fingers. Outside her window, she watched Adrian emerge from the manor's entrance, dressed for riding. Even from a distance, he was imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the unconscious authority of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. His dark hair caught the morning light, and she could imagine the severe beauty of his face, all sharp angles and aristocratic disdain. She'd thought him handsome once. Now she couldn't look at him without feeling the ache of rejection. He mounted his black stallion, Midnight, a beast as cold and unapproachable as its master, and rode toward the estate's western borders without once glancing up at the windows where his wife might be watching. Of course not. Why would he? "Ma'am?" Mary had returned, her hands twisting in her apron. "Begging your pardon, but Mrs. Thornberry sent me to remind you that the Ladies' Charitable Society meets this afternoon. She's hoping you'll attend." Mrs. Thornberry was the housekeeper, a formidable woman in her 60s who ran Ironvale Manor with iron efficiency. She'd been kind to Lillian in her own gruff way, probably pitying the young Duchess who'd been installed like furniture and then forgotten. "Tell Mrs. Thornberry I appreciate the reminder, but I think I'll rest today." "Are you feeling poorly, ma'am?" "Yes." "No." She felt hollowed out, scraped clean of hope and filled with something heavy and gray that might have been resignation or might have been the early stages of despair. "Just tired, Mary." The maid hesitated, then curtsied and withdrew, leaving Lillian alone with her cold breakfast and her colder thoughts. The day crept forward with agonizing slowness. She tried to paint. She'd once loved watercolors, but her hand felt heavy, and the colors looked muddy and wrong. She tried to read, but the words blurred together, meaningless. She tried to nap, but sleep wouldn't come, only a restless half-consciousness, filled with circular thoughts about her wasted life. By evening, she felt trapped in her own skin. At 7 o'clock, a knock came at her door. Not Mary this time, but Patterson, Adrian's personal valet, looking uncomfortable. "Your Grace, His Grace, the Duke requests your presence at dinner tonight. Lord and Lady Ashford will be joining, and your attendance is required." Required. Not requested. Not invited. Required, like a duty, like an obligation. "Tell His Grace I'll be down at 8. Patterson bowed and retreated, and Lillian sat staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror. She looked like a stranger, pale, thin, with shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her auburn hair, once her pride, hung limp and lifeless. When had she stopped caring about her appearance? When had she given up on everything except the bare minimum required to maintain the fiction of a functioning marriage? She dressed carefully in a gown of deep green silk that had always flattered her coloring, pinned her hair into an elegant style, and added the pearl necklace her mother had given her on her wedding day. armor for facing another evening of being ignored in a room full of people. The dining room at Ironvale Manor could seat 40 comfortably. Tonight, 4-place settings gleamed under the chandelier's light, positioned at one end of the massive mahogany table. Adrian at the head, Lord Ashford to his right, Lady Ashford beside him, and Lillian at the foot, as far from her husband as the arrangement allowed while still maintaining the pretense of intimacy. She arrived precisely at 8 to find Adrian already holding court with their guests, his posture relaxed in a way it never was around her. Lord Ashford, a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh, was describing a hunting expedition, while his wife, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, watched everything with the attention of a hawk sighting prey. "Duchess, how lovely you look this evening." Lady Ashford's greeting carried more assessment than warmth. "We were just discussing the upcoming season. Will you and the Duke be keeping a house in London this year?" Lillian took her seat, accepting a glass of wine from a hovering footman. "I believe His Grace maintains rooms at his club. My own plans are uncertain." Translation: her husband hadn't told her anything, and she'd learned not to ask. Lady Ashford's eyebrows rose fractionally. "How modern, separate establishments, though I suppose with the manor requiring so much attention." "The manor runs itself thanks to excellent staff," Adrian interjected smoothly, still not looking at Lillian. "I find London tedious in winter. Too many social obligations, not enough substance." He meant he found her tedious, Lillian thought. The social obligations of a wife, the substance of an actual marriage, these things bored him. Or worse, reminded him of what he'd lost. The dinner progressed through 7 courses of exquisite food that Lillian barely tasted. The conversation flowed around her like water around a stone. Politics, estate management, gossip about mutual acquaintances. Adrian spoke eloquently about agricultural reform and breeding programs. Lord Ashford shared ribald stories about their university days. Lady Ashford dropped carefully casual questions designed to probe the state of the Blackthorne marriage. And through it all, Adrian never once directed a comment to his wife, never once met her eyes, never once acknowledged her presence except as an unavoidable fixture at the far end of his table. "I say, Blackthorne," Lord Ashford said as the dessert course arrived, "your Duchess is looking rather pale. Perhaps she needs more country air. Or perhaps—" He waggled his eyebrows suggestively. "Perhaps she's keeping a secret." The implication was clear. Perhaps she was with child. The table fell silent. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Duchess enjoys excellent health," he said flatly. "Now, about the irrigation proposal we discussed." He changed the subject with brutal efficiency, and Lillian felt something inside her crack. They'd been married 2 years, and he couldn't even bear to discuss the possibility of an heir, the entire ostensible purpose of their union. The thought of touching her, of creating a child with her, was apparently so repulsive he wouldn't even engage in polite fiction about it. She set down her wineglass with more force than intended, the crystal ringing against the mahogany. All eyes turned to her. "Forgive me," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm afraid I have a headache developing. If you'll excuse me." She rose, and the men stood reflexively. Lady Ashford watched her with predatory interest. "Of course, my dear," Adrian said to the middle distance somewhere past her shoulder. "I hope you feel better." Such concern, such warmth, all performed for their guests' benefit, all utterly hollow. Lillian walked from the room with her head high, her footsteps echoing through the corridor, and she didn't let herself run until she reached the east wing, until she'd closed the door to her chambers and locked it behind her. Then she stood in the center of her too large bedroom and let herself shake. She should change into her nightgown. She should let Mary help her with her hair. She should take the headache powder and go to bed like a proper invalid, maintaining the fiction she'd created to escape that awful dinner. Instead, she found herself walking to the small secretary desk where she kept her personal correspondence. At the bottom of a drawer, wrapped in silk, was the letter her mother had written her on her wedding day. "My darling Lillian, marriage is rarely what we imagine in our girlish dreams. It requires patience, compromise, and courage. But remember this, you are a Hartwell woman, and we do not break. We bend, we adapt, we endure, but we never, ever break. Your father and I began as strangers bound by duty. It took years to build what we have now. Give it time. Give him time. but never forget your own worth in the process. All my love, mother time. She'd given him 2 years. How much more time did he need? How many more years of her youth, her hope, her self-respect was she supposed to sacrifice on the altar of his eternal mourning? Because that's what this was really about. Not her failings or her inadequacies, but his inability to let go of a dead woman. Lillian knew the story. Everyone knew the story. Before his father had arranged Adrian's marriage to her, there had been someone else. Elise Moreland, a beauty from a good family, the Duke's first choice, his true love. They'd been planning to marry when she'd fallen ill with scarlet fever and died within a week. Adrian had been 26, devastated, inconsolable. His father had given him 2 years to grieve, then informed him it was time to secure the succession. The Blackthorne line needed an heir, and personal feelings were subordinate to duty. Enter Lillian Hartwell, 19 years old, well-bred, biddable, available. She'd known about Elise going into the marriage. What she hadn't known was that 2 years later, Adrian would still be so lost in his grief that he could barely stand to look at the woman who'd replaced his lost love. She'd tried to be understanding. She'd tried to give him space. She'd tried to be patient. And where had it gotten her? Eating dinner at the opposite end of a table from her own husband, watching him laugh and engage with strangers while treating her like a particularly unfortunate piece of furniture. The fire had burned low, and Lillian felt suddenly bone-deep exhausted. She rang for Mary, submitted to having her hair brushed and her dress removed, and crawled into the massive 4-poster bed that had never held 2 people, not once in 2 years of marriage. Sleep came fitfully, full of anxious half-dreams about being invisible, about walking through rooms where people looked through her, about screaming and having no sound emerge. Then, past midnight, she heard it. Her bedroom door connected to a shared sitting room, which in turn connected to Adrian's chambers. The doors were almost always closed. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard movement from his side. But tonight, some sound drew her attention. A voice. His voice. Lillian rose from bed, drawn by curiosity and something darker. A need to understand what it would take to make this man feel something, anything, even if it wasn't for her. She crossed to the connecting door and pressed her ear against the wood. Elise. Adrian's voice, rough with sleep and something else, longing. Elise, don't go. Please. Lillian's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sound that might have been a sob or might have been a laugh. This was it then. This was what passion looked like in Duke Adrian Blackthorne. This was what tenderness sounded like in his voice. Just not for her. Never for her. I'm sorry, he was saying now, and she could hear him moving restlessly, sheets rustling. I'm so sorry. Should have been me. God, I miss you. Each word was a knife between her ribs. She stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to her husband pour out his heart to a woman 3 years dead, while his living wife stood on the other side of a door that might as well have been an ocean. When he finally settled back into quiet sleep, Lillian walked mechanically back to her bed. She didn't cry. She was beyond tears now, in some new territory where emotions had frozen into something sharp and crystalline and very, very clear. 2 years she'd spent trying to be good enough, kind enough, patient enough to earn a scrap of his attention. 2 years she'd spent believing that the problem was her, that if she could just be better, try harder, wait longer, he might eventually see her. But she understood now with perfect, terrible clarity, the problem wasn't her. The problem was that she was alive, and Elise Moreland was dead, and nothing Lillian could ever do would change the fact that Adrian Blackthorne's heart was buried in a grave at the village cemetery. She couldn't compete with a ghost. She couldn't win a war against a memory, and she was done trying. Lillian sat up in bed, her mind racing with a clarity she hadn't felt in months, years maybe. This endless waiting, this patient suffering, this slow erosion of her self-worth. It wasn't noble. It wasn't virtuous. It was just pathetic. Her mother's letter had said Hartwell women didn't break, but it had also said they adapted. So Lillian would adapt, but not by trying harder to win Adrian's love. That was a lost cause, a fool's errand. Instead, she would adapt by reclaiming whatever life she could carve out for herself within the prison of this marriage. She looked down at her left hand, at the heavy gold band that symbolized a union that existed only on paper. In the dim firelight, the ring seemed to mock her, All that wait, all that ceremony, all those promises. And for what? A thought struck her, so clear and sharp it felt like destiny. She slipped the ring off her finger. It came away easily, too easily, leaving a pale indentation in her skin. She held it up to the dying firelight, watching it gleam. This ring represented everything she'd tried to be: the dutiful wife, the patient companion, the understanding partner. It represented hope and faith and a willingness to be small, to be invisible, to wait forever for crumbs of affection. She was done being that woman. Lillian rose and crossed to the small jewelry box on her dressing table. She opened the bottom compartment, reserved for pieces she never wore, and placed the ring inside with deliberate care. Then she closed the box and turned away. Her hand felt strange without the ring's weight. Naked, free. Tomorrow, she whispered to the empty room, to the dying fire, to the life she was leaving behind. Everything changes. She didn't know yet what that meant, what form her reclaimed life would take, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was done grieving for a marriage that had never really existed. If Duke Adrian Blackthorne wanted to spend his life mourning a dead woman, that was his choice. But Lillian Blackthorne née Hartwell was very much alive, and she was done apologizing for it. As she finally drifted towards sleep, her last thought was of her bare ring finger and how light it felt, how right. The first snow continued to fall outside, covering Ironvale Manor in white. But inside in the east wing, in a duchess's heart, something was beginning to thaw, or perhaps it was beginning to freeze in a new way, hardening into something sharp enough to cut through the suffocating fog of misery that had defined her existence. Either way, the woman who would wake tomorrow morning would be different from the one who'd gone to sleep. The invisible duchess was about to become impossible to ignore. Morning came with winter's pale light filtering through frost-etched windows, and Lillian woke with the strange sensation that the world had tilted slightly on its axis overnight. Her hand felt wrong, too light. She flexed her fingers and looked down at the bare skin where her wedding ring had lived for 2 years. The pale band of untanned flesh remained, a ghost of commitment, but the weight was gone. She rose before Mary came to wake her, dressing herself in a morning gown of deep burgundy, a color she'd avoided because Adrian had once mentioned in their first week of marriage that Elise had looked lovely in pastels. Well, Elise was dead, and Lillian was done living around a dead woman's preferences. When Mary arrived with her breakfast tray, the maid's eyes went immediately to Lillian's bare hand. Her mouth opened, then closed. "Is something wrong, Mary?" "No, ma'am, your ring. I've put it away for cleaning," Lillian said smoothly, the lie coming easily. "The setting felt loose." Mary nodded, but her eyes were troubled. Servants always knew everything. By noon, the entire household would be whispering about the Duchess removing her wedding ring. Good, let them whisper. After breakfast, instead of retreating to her sitting room as usual, Lillian did something she hadn't done in over a year. She walked through the manor's main corridors during the household's active hours. She passed maids carrying linens, footmen polishing silver, the under-butler directing morning operations. Each person she encountered looked startled to see her, as if a painting had climbed down from its frame and started walking around. "Good morning, Mrs. Thornberry," Lillian said when she encountered the housekeeper in the main hall. "I'd like to discuss some changes to my daily schedule." Mrs. Thornberry, who'd been reviewing menus with the cook, looked up with barely concealed surprise. "Of course, Your Grace. Shall we speak in my office?" "Actually, I'd prefer the morning room. It has better light." The morning room was Adrian's preferred space for conducting estate business. Lillian had never once entered it uninvited. Mrs. Thornberry's eyebrows rose, but she followed without comment. The room was exactly as Lillian had imagined, masculine, efficient, dominated by a massive desk covered in ledgers and correspondence. Maps of the estate hung on the walls. The scent of tobacco and old leather filled the air. "I'll be taking breakfast in the smaller dining room from now on," Lillian announced, settling into one of the leather chairs as if she belonged there. "Not in my chambers, and I'll be using this room for my correspondence and reading in the mornings. Please have my things moved here by this afternoon." Mrs. Thornberry's professional mask slipped. "But ma'am, this is His Grace's. His Grace uses it in the afternoons and evenings. I'll be here in the mornings. Surely, a house this size can accommodate both the Duke and Duchess needing a workspace. Lillian smiled pleasantly, but her voice carried steel. Is there a problem? No, Your Grace. No problem at all. Excellent. I'll also be joining the Ladies' Charitable Society this week. Please send my acceptance to Lady Pemberton. And I'd like the curtains in my chambers changed. They're far too heavy. I want something lighter. White, I think. Or pale yellow. Colors that let in the sun. She was speaking quickly now, making decisions she'd been too timid to make before, reclaiming spaces and routines she'd seeded through 2 years of trying to be small and unobtrusive. Mrs. Thornbury scribbled notes, her expression caught between approval and concern. Very good, ma'am. Will there be anything else? Yes, the portrait of the previous Duchess Blackthorne in my sitting room, Adrian's mother. I'd like it moved to the gallery where it belongs. In its place, I'd like the landscape of the coast that's currently in storage. I saw it once in the attic, and I think it's lovely. This was more than redecorating. The portrait of Adrian's stern, disapproving mother had watched Lillian every day like a judge finding her wanting. Moving it was a statement. I will not live under the gaze of women who died before I arrived. I'll see to it today, Your Grace. After Mrs. Thornbury left, Lillian sat alone in Adrian's morning room, her morning room now, and felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not happiness, not yet, but possibility. The first green shoot of autonomy pushing through frozen ground. She was still sitting there when Adrian himself appeared in the doorway at 11 o'clock, clearly coming to review his correspondence before riding out to inspect the tenant farms. He stopped dead when he saw her, his expression flickering through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been irritation before settling into his usual careful blankness. Lillian. He never called her by her name. This was a first. Adrian. She met his eyes deliberately, watching him flinch almost imperceptibly. I hope you don't mind. I've claimed the morning hours in this room for my own work. You're welcome to use it in the afternoons as always. His jaw tightened. I wasn't aware you had work that required an office. I do now. I'll be taking a more active role in the charitable organizations associated with the estate. Lady Pemberton has been managing them single-handedly for years, but as Duchess, the responsibility should be shared. She watched him process this, watched him search for an objection and find none. What could he say? That his wife shouldn't involve herself in appropriate aristocratic charity work? That she should stay locked in her chambers like a shameful secret? I see, he said finally. Well, don't let me disturb you. He turned to leave, and Lillian felt a perverse urge to push harder. Adrian? He paused, his back rigid. I won't be available for dinner Thursday evening. I'm attending Lady Pemberton's salon. I thought you should know. Now he did turn, his gray eyes narrowing slightly. You're attending a salon? Is there a reason I shouldn't? No, of course not. It's just, you don't usually... I'm doing many things I don't usually do. I've decided it's time I stopped hiding in the East Wing and started living like the Duchess of Ironvale. Something flashed in his expression. Alarm, maybe, or confusion. His eyes dropped to her hands, which were folded calmly in her lap, and she saw the exact moment he registered the missing ring. His face went carefully blank. Your wedding ring. I've put it away. The setting needed repair. It was the same lie she'd told Mary, but this time it felt like a challenge. They both knew the ring was perfectly fine. They both knew what the absence meant. I'll have the jeweler sent for. That won't be necessary. I'll attend to it myself when I'm ready. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. For the first time in 2 years, they were actually looking at each other, actually engaged in something approaching real conversation, even if that conversation was fundamentally about boundaries and territory. Adrian's throat worked as if he wanted to say something more, but in the end, he simply nodded curtly and left. Lillian sat very still, her heart pounding. That small confrontation had taken more courage than she'd known she possessed, but she'd done it. She'd claimed space, asserted herself, and survived. The day continued in this strange new key. Lillian took lunch in the smaller dining room instead of her chambers, forcing the household to accommodate her presence in the communal spaces. She walked the portrait gallery, really looking at the Blackthorne ancestors for the first time, claiming their history as her own by marriage, even if Adrian refused to claim her. In the afternoon, she found her way to the Manor's conservatory, a glass-walled room on the south side that she'd glimpsed only from a distance before. Inside, winter light streamed through the windows, warming banks of exotic plants that the previous Duchess had cultivated. The space had been maintained but felt abandoned, as if waiting for someone to bring it back to life. Beautiful, isn't it? Mrs. Thornberry had followed her, arms full of linens. The late Duchess spent hours here. After she passed, His Grace couldn't bear to enter it, but he wouldn't let it be neglected either. More ghosts. This entire manor was haunted by absent women. I'd like to start using it, Lillian said. For painting. The light is perfect. That would be lovely, Your Grace. The late Duchess painted here, too. That gave Lillian pause. She didn't want to occupy another dead woman's space, didn't want to be compared and found wanting. But then she thought, no. This conservatory belonged to Ironvale Manor, which meant it belonged to her as much as anyone. She wouldn't let fear of comparison keep her from claiming what was hers by right. Please have my painting supplies brought down from storage. By evening, word of the Duchess's transformation had spread through the household like wildfire. Lillian could feel it in the way servants looked at her with new attention, the way the housekeeper consulted her about details she'd previously decided unilaterally, the way the manor itself seemed to shift around her expanding presence. She dressed for dinner in her chambers, still eating alone, but now by choice rather than abandonment, and after the meal, instead of retreating immediately to bed, she ventured to the library. The Ironvale Library was magnificent, 3 stories of books lining walls of dark wood, with a spiral staircase connecting the levels. Lillian had been here only twice before, intimidated by the space's scholarly grandeur. Tonight she walked in as if she owned it, which legally she partly did. She was browsing the poetry section when she heard voices approaching, Adrian's voice, and another man's. She had just enough time to recognize Lord Pemberton's booming tones before they entered. Both men stopped short when they saw her. Duchess. Lord Pemberton recovered first, his florid face breaking into a smile. What a pleasant surprise. I told Blackthorne I'd stop by to discuss the irrigation cooperative. I hope we're not disturbing you. Not at all. Lillian selected a volume of Wordsworth and turned to face them. Please don't let me interrupt your business. But she didn't leave. She settled into one of the leather chairs near the fire and opened her book, claiming her right to be there. Adrian's expression was unreadable. Lillian, Lord Pemberton and I have estate matters to discuss. Perhaps I understand perfectly. I'll be quite content reading here. Pretend I'm not here. She smiled sweetly. You're quite good at that. Lord Pemberton coughed to cover what might have been a laugh. Adrian's jaw clenched, but he couldn't very well order his own wife to leave the library. They conducted their business in low voices at the far end of the room, while Lillian pretended to read, actually listening to every word. Estate management, tenant concerns, crop rotation, water rights, all the practical matters that made up the unsexy reality of running a ducal property. She'd been shut out of this world, told implicitly that these weren't her concerns, but they should have been. As Duchess, the welfare of Ironvale's tenants and dependents was as much her responsibility as Adrian's. When the men finally concluded their business, Lord Pemberton approached her chair with obvious pleasure. My wife will be delighted that you've accepted her invitation to the salon, Your Grace. She's been hoping to get to know you better. I'm looking forward to it. Excellent, excellent. You know, Lady Pemberton runs a rather informal gathering, lots of discussion about books and current affairs, women speaking their minds quite freely. I hope you won't find it too lively. I suspect I'll find it refreshing. After Lord Pemberton left, Adrian lingered in the doorway, clearly wanting to say something but unable to find the words. Lillian kept her eyes on her book. You've been busy today, he finally said. Yes, I've decided to stop wasting my life. The bluntness seemed to startle him. Wasting? Was there something you needed, Adrian? Because if not, I'd like to finish this chapter. He stood there a moment longer, and she could feel his confusion, his discomfort at having his invisible wife suddenly become very visible and very inconvenient. No, he said quietly. Nothing. He left, and Lillian allowed herself a small, fierce smile. The following days fell into a new pattern. Lillian rose early, took breakfast in the small dining room, worked in the morning room until Adrian needed it, then spent afternoons painting in the conservatory or walking the estate grounds. She began learning the names of servants she'd previously only glimpsed, asking about their families, their concerns. She started accompanying Mrs. Thornberry on inspections of the household, learning how Ironvale actually functioned. And everywhere she went, her bare left hand drew eyes and whispers. Adrian began appearing more frequently in her orbit, as if her sudden visibility had made her impossible to avoid. At breakfast on Tuesday, he walked into the small dining room to find her reading the morning newspapers, something he'd always done alone. "I thought you took breakfast earlier," she said without looking up. "I changed my schedule." "How inconvenient. There's another place setting if you'd like to join me." He did, settling across from her in uncomfortable silence. They ate without speaking, the clink of silverware on china the only sound. But it was a start. Two people occupying the same space, sharing the same meal, even if they had nothing to say to each other. Thursday evening came, and Lillian dressed for Lady Pemberton's salon with particular care. She chose a gown of midnight blue that made her auburn hair glow like copper and brought out the green in her eyes. Mary dressed her hair in an elegant style that was fashionable without being fussy. "You look beautiful, ma'am," Mary said softly. "Thank you, Mary." Lillian studied herself in the mirror. She did look different, less pale, less haunted. Her eyes had lost some of their dead quality. When she descended the main staircase, she found Adrian in the entrance hall, clearly on his way out to his club. He stopped and stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're going out," he said unnecessarily. "To Lady Pemberton's salon. I told you." "Yes, I forgot." How typical. He forgot everything about her except that she was an inconvenience. "Don't wait up," she said lightly, sweeping past him toward where the carriage waited. Lady Pemberton's salon was held in the drawing room of Pemberton House, a comfortable townhouse 20 minutes from Ironvale. When Lillian arrived, she found a dozen women of various ages gathered in clusters, talking animatedly over tea and small cakes. "Duchess Blackthorne." Lady Pemberton rushed over, all warmth and genuine welcome. "I'm so pleased you could join us. Let me introduce you around." The women were a revelation. Lady Pemberton herself was sharp-witted and well-read. Her friend Mrs. Ashworth ran a school for village children and spoke passionately about education reform. Young Miss Caroline Hartford was visiting from London and full of gossip about the latest philosophical societies. Old Mrs. Denholm had traveled extensively and loved shocking people with stories from her adventures in India. These weren't vapid society women making empty small talk. They were intelligent, engaged, curious about the world beyond their drawing rooms. "I understand you paint, Your Grace," Mrs. Ashworth said. "What's your preferred subject?" "Landscapes, mostly, though I've been experimenting with light and shadow recently." "Oh, you must see Caroline's work," Lady Pemberton interjected. "She's been studying with a master in London. Very modern techniques." The conversation flowed from art to politics to literature. They discussed the latest novels, debated women's roles in charitable work, even touched carefully on the question of property rights for married women, a radical topic that would have been unthinkable in more conservative circles. Lillian found herself leaning forward, contributing opinions, laughing at witty observations. When had she last felt this alive, this engaged with other human beings? "Your Grace," Mrs. Denholm said during a lull, her keen old eyes fixed on Lillian's face, "forgive me for being blunt, but you seem like a woman who's recently made an important decision. There's a particular energy about you." The room quieted slightly, attention shifting to Lillian. "You're very perceptive, Mrs. Denholm." "I've been alive 73 years. One learns to recognize the signs of a woman coming into her own power." Lillian smiled. "Then yes, I've decided to stop apologizing for existing." "But excellent," the old woman said firmly. "Nothing more tiresome than a woman who makes herself small to accommodate a man's ego." Several women laughed, though a few looked scandalized. Lady Pemberton caught Lillian's eye with a look of warm approval. The evening stretched long and satisfying. By the time Lillian returned to Ironvale Manor past midnight, She felt more herself than she had in 2 years. The entrance hall was dark except for a single lamp left burning for her return. She was halfway up the stairs when a voice stopped her. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Adrian stood in the shadows near the library door, still fully dressed despite the late hour. "Very much." "I'm glad." He stepped into the light, and she saw tension in every line of his body. "Lillian, we need to talk." "Do we? How unusual." "Your ring is being repaired, as I told you. Don't lie to me." His voice was low, almost dangerous. "I'm not a fool. You've removed it. You've changed everything. The servants are talking, the neighbors are noticing. What are you doing?" Lillian descended 2 steps so she could look him in the eye. "I'm living, Adrian. I'm claiming my life. I'm done being your invisible penance." "Penance? What are you talking about? I know you didn't want this marriage. I know you're still mourning Elise Moreland. I know I'm a poor substitute for the woman you really loved." Her voice remained steady, clinical. "But I'm done trying to compete with a ghost. I'm done making myself small and quiet and ignorant, hoping that somehow that will make you finally see me." His face had gone pale. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You use me as a convenient excuse to keep grieving. As long as I'm here reminding you of your loss, you don't have to move forward. You don't have to heal. Well, I release you from that obligation. Lillian, I'm not leaving. I'm not asking for a divorce or separation. Those would create scandal, and I have no desire to humiliate either of us publicly. But I am reclaiming my dignity. I will live in this house as the Duchess of Ironvale, in fact, not just in title. I will make friends, pursue interests, and occupy space, and I will do it all without your permission or approval." She turned to continue up the stairs. "Wait." His voice cracked slightly. "Please." She paused but didn't turn around. "I never meant to make you feel invisible. And yet you succeeded brilliantly. I don't know how to... I'm not good at basic human decency? At treating your wife like a person instead of an inconvenient obligation?" Now she did turn, and she let him see the full force of her hurt and anger. "You whisper her name in your sleep, Adrian. You call for Elise while I'm standing 10 feet away. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" His face crumpled. "You heard that?" "Yes, and that's when I understood. I will never be enough. Not because I'm inadequate, but because I'm alive and she's not. So I'm done trying." She left him standing in the entrance hall and didn't look back. In her chambers, Mary was waiting to help her undress, but Lillian dismissed her gently. She needed to be alone with the enormity of what she'd just done. She'd confronted him, actually confronted him, laid bare the truth of their miserable marriage and demanded nothing, which was somehow more powerful than any plea for affection could have been. Sleep came more easily than she expected, and when she woke the next morning, she felt clear-headed and purposeful. The next week brought more changes. Lillian joined the Ladies' Charitable Society and immediately began organizing more effective distribution of winter provisions to tenant families. She commissioned a local artist to give her painting lessons twice weekly. She started riding again, taking out a gentle mare named Starlight and exploring the estate grounds she'd only ever seen from windows. And she stopped avoiding Adrian. If he was in a room, she entered it anyway. If he was at breakfast, she joined him. If he was reviewing estate papers in the evening, she sat nearby with her book. She didn't engage him in conversation. That would be forcing intimacy he didn't want. But she refused to hide anymore. It clearly unsettled him. He'd grown accustomed to her absence, her convenient invisibility. Now she was everywhere, polite but distant, present but untouchable. "The Duchess seems different," she overheard Lord Ashford say to Adrian at a small dinner party Lillian had decided to attend. "More vibrant, happy even." "Yes," Adrian said tightly. "She's been quite busy. Good for her. Young woman shouldn't moulder away in the country. Need society, engagement. You should bring her to London for the season." Perhaps. But they both knew he wouldn't. Adrian avoided London society because it reminded him too much of Elise, of the life they'd planned together. Another space Lillian had ceded without fight. Well, not anymore. A month after removing her ring, Lillian received an invitation to the Winter Assembly in Thornwick, the local society's biggest event of the season. In previous years, she'd declined, using illness or fatigue as excuses. This year, she sent immediate acceptance. The night of the assembly, she dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that had been languishing in her wardrobe, too fine and bold for a woman trying to be invisible. Mary arranged her hair with pearl pins, and Lillian wore the Blackthorne diamond necklace, a family piece she had every right to but had never dared claim. When she descended the stairs, Adrian was waiting in the entrance hall, clearly also planning to attend. He stared at her with something that might have been shock. "You're going to the assembly?" "Yes. Is that a problem?" "No, you never go." "I never did many things. Shall we share a carriage, or would you prefer to arrive separately?" The question forced him to make a choice. Arriving separately would fuel gossip. Arriving together would create the appearance of a united couple. "Together," he said quietly. "We'll go together." The carriage ride was silent and tense. Lillian looked out the window at the winter landscape, while Adrian sat rigidly across from her, stealing glances when he thought she wasn't looking. The assembly was held in Thornwick's largest hall, decorated with evergreen garlands and lit by hundreds of candles. When the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorne were announced, every head turned. Lillian felt the weight of those stares, curious, speculative, some sympathetic, some malicious. Everyone knew the strange state of the Blackthorne marriage. Everyone had opinions about the cold Duke and his invisible Duchess. Well, the invisible Duchess was invisible no longer. Lady Pemberton swept over immediately, linking arms with Lillian. "Your Grace, how wonderful you look. Come, there are several people desperate to meet you properly." She was pulled into a circle of local society, women she'd only glimpsed at church or passed in carriages. They welcomed her warmly, asked about her painting, her charitable work, her opinions on everything from literature to local politics. Across the room, Adrian stood with a group of gentlemen, but his eyes kept finding her. She could feel his gaze like a physical touch, confused and unsettled. When the dancing began, Lord Pemberton claimed the first dance with Lillian before Adrian could object. "You've caused quite a stir, Your Grace," Pemberton said as they moved through the figures of a country dance. "Have I? Coming back to life tends to attract attention. The whispers are all positive, I assure you. People are pleased to see you engaging with the community." "And the Duke?" Pemberton's jovial face grew more serious. "Between you and me, Your Grace, Blackthorne's been a ghost himself these past years. Maybe your resurrection will remind him what it means to be alive." The dance ended, and Lillian was immediately claimed by another partner, then another. She danced every dance, laughed at jokes, made conversation, and felt herself blooming under the warmth of genuine social connection. Adrian didn't ask her to dance. He stood at the periphery, drinking more than usual, watching her with an expression that grew darker as the evening progressed. Near midnight, Lillian stepped onto the terrace for air. The winter night was sharp and clear, stars blazing overhead. She'd been there only a moment when Adrian appeared beside her. "You're the toast of the assembly," he said, his voice rough. "People are kind. They're enchanted. I've never seen you like this." "You've never looked." He flinched. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" She turned to face him fully. "You've spent 2 years perfecting the art of not seeing me. Of course you didn't know I could be like this. You didn't want to know." "I'm trying." He stopped, struggling for words. "Your ring, why haven't you put it back on?" "Because it symbolized a lie. A marriage that existed only on paper. I won't wear it again unless it means something real." "What do you want from me?" The question hung between them, enormous and impossible. What did she want? Love? That seemed too much to ask from a man whose heart was buried with another woman. Affection? Maybe. Respect? Absolutely. "I want you to see me," she said finally. "Not as a substitute for Elise, not as an obligation or a burden. Just see me, as I am." Adrian's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I don't know if I can." The honesty was brutal and strangely respectful. "Then we have nothing more to discuss." She moved to go back inside, but he caught her arm, the first time he'd touched her in months. "Wait, Please, I'm not I'm not good at this. At feeling things, at being present, but I'm trying to understand. You've changed everything, and I don't know how to maintain your comfortable distance. She pulled her arm free gently. That's the point, Adrian. I'm not making it easy for you to ignore me anymore. She left him on the terrace and returned to the warmth and light of the assembly. But something had shifted. The confrontation felt like progress, even if it was painful progress. He was finally noticing her absence, not of her body, but of her compliance, of her willingness to be nothing. The carriage ride home was electric with unspoken words. Adrian kept starting to speak, then stopping. Lillian sat calmly, hands folded in her lap, the bare ring finger prominent. When they arrived at Ironvale Manor, he helped her from the carriage, another unusual gesture, and walked beside her to the entrance. Lillian. Her name again. He was using it more now. I know I have no right to ask, but could we try? To find some way forward? Forward to what? I don't know. Something better than this cold war we've been fighting. She studied his face in the lamplight, the sharp aristocratic features, the gray eyes that had never quite looked at her until recently, the mouth that had never smiled in her direction. I'll think about it, she said finally. But understand this, Adrian. I won't go back to being invisible. Whatever we build, if we build anything, it has to include me as an equal, not as a shadow or a placeholder. I understand. Do you? Because agreeing in principle and actually changing are very different things. He nodded slowly. I know, but I'd like to try. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise of affection, but it was acknowledgement, and that was more than she'd had before. Good night, Adrian. Good night. She climbed the stairs to her chambers, aware of him watching her go, aware that something fundamental had cracked in the frozen edifice of their marriage. Whether it would thaw into something viable or simply shatter completely remained to be seen. But for the first time since removing her wedding ring, Lillian felt the faintest flutter of possibility. Whether it would thaw into something viable or simply shatter completely remained to be seen. But for the first time since removing her wedding ring, Lillian felt the faintest flutter of possibility. That possibility lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning after the assembly, Lillian was painting in the conservatory when Mrs. Thornberry appeared, her face drawn tight with the kind of careful neutrality that signaled bad news. Your Grace, you have a visitor. Lady Marguerite Morland is in the drawing room. The paintbrush slipped from Lillian's fingers, leaving a streak of Prussian blue across her canvas. Morland, Elise's mother. Did she say what she wanted? No, ma'am, but she's most insistent on seeing you. She came without an appointment. Lillian set down her palette with deliberate care, buying herself time to think. In 2 years, Elise's family had never once visited Ironvale Manor, never acknowledged Lillian's existence. The Morlands had retreated into their grief after Elise's death, and Adrian had let them, maintaining a careful distance that Lillian had assumed was mutual avoidance of painful memories. So why now? Why appear at her door without warning? Where's the Duke? Riding the western borders, ma'am. He won't be back until evening. Of course. Lady Marguerite had chosen her timing carefully. Lillian smoothed her painting smock and checked her reflection in the conservatory glass. Paint smudged on her cheek, hair slightly disheveled, no ring on her finger. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd stopped performing the role of perfect duchess. Good. Show her to the drawing room. I'll be there shortly. She took her time washing the paint from her hands, changing into a day dress of charcoal gray that made her look older and more formidable. When she finally entered the drawing room, she found Lady Marguerite Morland standing by the window, her black mourning clothes a stark accusation against the room's pale furnishings. The woman turned, and Lillian saw immediately where Elise had gotten her legendary beauty. Even in her 50s, even hollowed out by grief, Lady Marguerite was striking, blonde hair gone silver, porcelain skin, ice blue eyes that cut like razors. Those eyes raked over Lillian with undisguised contempt. So you're the replacement. No greeting, no pretense of civility, just pure distilled hostility. Lillian closed the door behind her and crossed to the tea service. Lady Marguerite, This is unexpected. I'm sure it is. I've been content to pretend you don't exist for 2 years, but recent events have forced my hand. What events would those be? Lillian poured tea she didn't want, using the ritual to steady her hands. Don't play coy. The entire county is talking about the Blackthorne marriage. About the Duchess, who's suddenly come out of hiding. About the missing wedding ring. About the way you've been parading yourself at assemblies and salons, making a spectacle of your discontent. Lillian set down the teapot with more force than necessary. I've been living my life. If that's a spectacle, the problem lies with the observers, not with me. Your life. Lady Marguerite's voice dripped venom. You have no life here. You're a placeholder, a biological necessity for producing an heir. That's all you've ever been, all you'll ever be. And now you're getting ideas above your station. The words were designed to wound, and they did. But Lillian had spent 2 years absorbing rejection. She'd built up scar tissue. Is there a purpose to this visit, or did you come solely to insult me in my own home? This isn't your home. It's Elise's home. It was supposed to be hers. Every stone, every painting, every tradition, Adrian built it all for her. You're just inhabiting her space, wearing her title, living the life she should have had. Elise is dead. Lillian's voice came out harder than she intended. She's been dead for 5 years. At some point, the living have to matter more than the dead. Lady Marguerite moved so fast Lillian barely saw it coming. The slap cracked across her cheek, sharp and stunning. For a moment, neither woman moved. Lillian's face burned, and she tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. Lady Marguerite stood trembling, her hand still raised, her face contorted with grief and rage. Don't you dare speak her name, the older woman hissed. Don't you dare pretend you have any right to an opinion about my daughter's death. You didn't know her. You couldn't possibly understand what the world lost when she died. Lillian touched her stinging cheek, her own anger rising hot and sharp. And you can't possibly understand what it's like to live in the shadow of a ghost, to be married to a man who calls another woman's name in his sleep, to be treated like an intruder in your own home because you had the audacity to survive when his true love didn't. You think you deserve sympathy? You think you've suffered? Lady Marguerite laughed, a brittle, terrible sound. You have no idea what suffering is. My daughter died in agony, begging for Adrian, and he couldn't save her. He's carried that guilt every day since. And then his father forced him to marry you. Some vapid girl with no accomplishments, no presence, nothing to recommend her except a decent bloodline and a compliant nature. Each word was a precision strike, aimed at every insecurity Lillian had ever harbored. If I'm so vapid and worthless, why are you here? Why bother confronting someone beneath your notice? Because you're disrupting his grief. Lady Marguerite stepped closer, her voice dropping to something more dangerous than shouting. Adrian has found a kind of peace in his sorrow. He's built a life around honoring Elise's memory, and now you're destroying that. Making demands, drawing attention, forcing him to acknowledge you. You're pulling him away from her. Understanding crashed over Lillian like cold water. You want to keep him trapped. You want him to spend the rest of his life mourning your daughter because it makes you feel like she's not really gone. I want him to remember what real love looks like, what real partnership could have been. I won't let some mediocre replacement make him forget Elise's brilliance. I'm not trying to make him forget her. I'm trying to make him see me. Why should he? What do you possibly have to offer compared to what he lost? The question hung in the air like poison gas. And the terrible thing was, Lillian had asked herself the same question 1,000 times. I'm alive, she said finally. That's what I offer. The possibility of an actual future instead of an eternal shrine to the past. How dare you? No. Lillian's voice cut through the older woman's rage. How dare you? You come into my home, assault me, tell me I'm worthless, and expect me to accept it graciously because your grief is so much more important than my dignity. I'm sorry for your loss, truly. But Elise's death doesn't give you the right to make my life a punishment. Your life should be a punishment. You stole what was meant for my daughter. I stole nothing. I was 18 years old when our families arranged this marriage. I had no choice in it, no power over it. I was delivered to a man who couldn't bear to look at me in a house full of ghosts, and told to smile and be grateful for the privilege. Then leave. Lady Marguerite's eyes glittered with malice. If you're so miserable, dissolve the marriage. Walk away. Let Adrian find someone worthy of him, or let him remain faithful to Elise's memory and peace. I'm not leaving. Why not? Pride? Stubbornness? You clearly have no love for him, and he certainly has none for you. Lillian met the older woman's gaze steadily. Because this is my home now, my title, my life. I won't be driven out by a dead woman's grieving mother just because my presence is inconvenient to your eternal mourning. The drawing room door opened, and both women turned to see Adrian standing in the doorway, still in his riding clothes, his face thunderous. Lady Marguerite, I wasn't aware you were calling. How much had he heard? His expression gave nothing away, but tension radiated from him like heat. Lady Marguerite recovered quickly, smoothing her skirts, arranging her face into something approaching civility. Adrian, I apologize for the intrusion. I felt it necessary to speak with your wife about certain concerns regarding the estate's reputation. His eyes flicked to Lillian, taking in her flushed face, the red mark on her cheek that was already darkening. His jaw clenched. What concerns? Nothing of consequence, simply a matter of propriety. Given the Duchess's recent increased visibility, I thought it prudent to offer guidance on maintaining the dignity appropriate to the Blackthorne name. Guidance. Adrian's voice was dangerously soft. Is that what you call striking my wife? Lady Marguerite paled. I don't know what she's told you, but I saw the mark on her face. Don't insult my intelligence by denying it. It was merely a momentary loss of composure. She spoke disrespectfully about Elise, and you assaulted the Duchess of Ironvale in her own home. He moved further into the room, and despite everything, Lillian felt a flutter of something at seeing him defend her. Whatever your grief, whatever your feelings about this marriage, that is unacceptable. Adrian, surely you understand. I understand that you need to leave. Now. Lady Marguerite's composure cracked. She's destroying everything you built with Elise, everything you planned. Can't you see what she's doing? What I see is a woman who's endured 2 years of my neglect with more grace than I deserved. What I see is my wife being attacked in her own drawing room by someone who should know better. You're choosing her over Elise's memory? The question was a trap, and they all knew it. Lillian held her breath. Adrian's face was carved from stone. I'm choosing basic decency over cruelty. I'm choosing the present over an idealized past, and I'm asking you to leave my house. Elise would be heartbroken. Elise is dead! The words exploded from Adrian with a force that shocked everyone in the room, including himself. She's been dead for 5 years, and I can't keep punishing everyone around me because I failed to save her. Silence crashed down like a fallen tree. Lady Marguerite stood frozen, her face ashen. Adrian looked as if he'd been gutted, the admission having cost him something irretrievable. Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs. Get out, Adrian said quietly, and don't come back unless you're prepared to treat my wife with the respect her position demands. Lady Marguerite drew herself up, wounded dignity warring with rage. You'll regret this. When the novelty of her defiance wears off, you'll remember what you lost, and you'll hate her for making you forget Elise. She swept from the room, and moments later they heard the front door slam. Adrian stood very still, his back to Lillian, shoulders rigid with tension. Thank you, Lillian said softly, for defending me. I should have done it years ago. His voice was raw. I should have protected you from all of this. From her. From myself. Adrian, no, I need to say this. He turned to face her, and she saw anguish in his eyes. Lady Marguerite was right about one thing. I have been keeping a shrine to Elise, using her memory as an excuse to never risk feeling anything again. And you've paid the price for my cowardice. Lillian wanted to go to him, but didn't trust the ground between them. Why now? Why are you saying this now? Because watching you come back to life these past weeks has shown me what I've been doing, how I've been existing rather than living. You removed your ring, and it was like you'd held up a mirror showing me exactly how hollow I've become. I didn't do it to punish you. I know. You did it to save yourself. And that's even worse because it means I made you so miserable that disappearing was your only option. The vulnerability in his voice undid something in Lillian's chest. For 2 years she'd wanted this. Wanted him to see her, to acknowledge her pain, to show some evidence of a beating heart beneath the aristocratic ice. But now that it was happening, she found herself terrified. What are you saying, Adrian? I'm saying I want to try, really try. Not just agreeing in principle like I did after the assembly, but actually changing, actually building something real with you. Why? Because Lady Marguerite attacked me and you felt guilty? Because I watched you walk into that assembly like a queen and I realized I'd been living with a stranger who could have been my partner if I'd ever bothered to know her? Because you've been braver than I've ever been, and I'm tired of being the villain in my own life. Hope was a dangerous thing. Lillian had learned that well. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly her hands shook. Words are easy, Adrian. You've spent 2 years showing me exactly how little I matter. I won't be your temporary project, something you pay attention to until the guilt fades and you drift back to your comfortable grief. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking anyway. Before she could respond, Mrs. Baz. Thornberry appeared in the doorway, her face even more troubled than before. Your Grace, I apologize for the interruption, but there's been an incident at the Tennant Farms. One of the cottages caught fire. The Cooper family. Their youngest child is missing. Adrian's entire bearing changed, shifting from vulnerable husband to decisive duke in an instant. How long ago? 20 minutes. They've been searching but haven't found her. She's only 4 years old. Get every able-bodied person organized for a search. Check the barns, the woods, anywhere a child might hide or get trapped. He was already moving toward the door, then paused. Lillian, stay here. It's not safe. I'm coming with you. It's dangerous. The fire could spread, and if she's in the woods, those are my tenants too. That's my responsibility too. I'm coming. For a moment she thought he'd argue, assert his authority as duke and husband, but something in her expression stopped him. Then we go together, but stay close. They rode hard toward the Tennant Farms, the smell of smoke growing stronger as they approached. The Cooper cottage was a blackened shell, flames still licking at the roof while men threw buckets of water to prevent the spread to neighboring buildings. Mrs. Cooper stood in the yard, her face streaked with tears and soot, her other 3 children clinging to her skirts. We can't find Annie, she sobbed when she saw Adrian. She was playing outside when the fire started. We thought she ran to the neighbors, but she's not there. She's not anywhere. Adrian immediately organized the men into search teams, his natural authority cutting through the chaos. Lillian approached Mrs. Cooper gently. Where does Annie like to play? Everywhere. She's a wanderer. We're always finding her in the strangest places. Does she have a favorite spot? Somewhere she feels safe? Mrs. Cooper's eyes widened. The old tree. There's a hollow oak at the edge of the woods where she likes to hide her treasures. She calls it her secret house. Show me. They ran toward the woods, Mrs. Cooper leading the way to a massive oak tree 50 yards from the cottage. At its base, partially hidden by roots, was an opening just large enough for a small child. Annie, Mrs. Cooper called. Annie, baby, are you in there? A whimper answered, and Lillian's heart leapt. Get your husband, Lillian told Mrs. Cooper, and bring a lamp. She knelt by the opening, peering into darkness that smelled of earth and fear. Annie? My name is Lillian. I'm here to help you come out. I'm scared. The child's voice was tiny, trembling. There was fire. I ran away. That was very smart. You're safe now. Can you come toward my voice? I can't. I'm stuck. Lillian looked back toward the cottage, calculating distances. The search party was still combing other areas. By the time they organized a proper rescue, Annie could panic, could hurt herself trying to get free. The opening was small, barely wide enough for an adult woman. It would be tight, possibly dangerous. Lillian didn't hesitate. She pulled off her riding jacket and began working her way into the hollow, ignoring the scrape of bark against her shoulders, the suffocating darkness that closed around her. Her pulse hammered, but she kept her voice calm. I'm coming to you, Annie. Keep talking so I can find you. It's dark. I know, but we'll get out together. Can you see my hand? She'd reached far enough that her fingers brushed something, fabric, warm skin. Annie grabbed her hand with surprising strength. I've got you. Lillian said. Now you're going to hold on to me very tight, and I'm going to pull us both out. It might feel scary, but I won't let go. Do you understand? Yes. Lillian began working backward, pulling Annie with her. The space was tighter than she'd anticipated. She could feel panic rising, her breath coming faster in the confined dark. Her shoulders wedged against the opening. She was stuck. Mrs. Cooper, she called, trying to keep the fear from her voice. I need help. Footsteps pounded toward them. Adrian's voice, sharp with alarm. Lillian, are you in there? I have Annie, but I'm caught. You'll need to pull us both out. Move aside, Adrian ordered someone. Carefully. Thornberry, get that branch away from the opening. Lillian, can you push with your feet? I'll try. She felt hands grab her ankles, then her calves. Adrian's hands, she knew instinctively. He pulled steadily while she pushed, and slowly, painfully, she felt herself moving backward. Annie clung to her like a barnacle, and Lillian held the child against her chest, protecting her from the scraping bark. Then suddenly, they were free, tumbling out into gray daylight. Mrs. Buzz. Cooper rushed forward, gathering Annie into her arms with desperate relief. The child was dirty and terrified, but unharmed. Lillian lay on the ground, breathing hard, her dress torn, her arms bleeding from a dozen scrapes. Adrian knelt beside her, his face pale. That was incredibly stupid and incredibly brave. His hands moved over her, checking for serious injury. Are you hurt? I'm fine. Is Annie? She's perfect, thanks to you. He pulled her up to sitting, and she saw something fierce and bright in his eyes. You could have been trapped. The tree could have collapsed. You could have... But I wasn't, and she's safe. You terrified me. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Lillian met his gaze and saw real fear there, real concern, not for the Duchess or the air-producing vessel, but for her, for Lillian. Your Grace! Mr. Cooper was approaching, Annie in his arms, his face overwhelmed with gratitude. We can never thank you enough. You saved our little girl. The other tenant families gathered around, offering blankets, praise, tearful thanks. Lillian found herself at the center of genuine warmth and appreciation for the first time since arriving at Ironvale. These people saw her, valued her, not for her title or her bloodline, but for her actions. The ride back to the manor was quiet, both of them processing what had happened. When they arrived, Adrian helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist. Let me see your arms. In her chambers he watched while Mary cleaned and bandaged the scrapes. His presence felt strange, unprecedented. Adrian, in her private space, actually present and attentive. After Mary left, he remained standing by the window, clearly struggling with something. What Lady Marguerite said today, he began, about you being a replacement, about this marriage being a placeholder arrangement. She wasn't entirely wrong. Lillian's stomach dropped. Adrian, let me finish, please. He turned to face her. When my father arranged our marriage, I agreed because I didn't care anymore. About anything. Elisa's death had hollowed me out, and I thought I'd spend the rest of my life going through the motions of duty without feeling anything real ever again. That's not news to me. No, but what I didn't understand then, what I'm only beginning to understand now, is that grief can become an addiction. It became easier to keep mourning than to risk living again. Safer to maintain distance than to get close to someone who might also leave. Lillian's breath caught. This was more honesty than she'd ever expected from him. Today, when you went into that tree, when I realized you might be trapped, might be hurt, his voice roughened. I felt terror, real, visceral fear. Not because losing you would be inconvenient or create scandal, but because the thought of a world without you in it suddenly seemed unbearable. Adrian, I don't love you. Not yet. I don't know if I remember how to love anyone, but I think I could. I think I want to. And watching you these past weeks, seeing you reclaim your life and your power, has made me realize what an absolute fool I've been. He crossed to where she sat and knelt before her, taking her bandaged hands in his. I can't give you pretty words or grand romantic gestures. I can't promise to suddenly become someone I'm not. But I can promise to try. To actually see you, to build something real instead of hiding in the past. Lillian looked down at their joined hands, at the space where her wedding ring should be. I need more than promises, Adrian. I need proof. Consistent, daily proof that I matter to you. Then I'll give it to you, starting now, starting with this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, Lillian gasped. Inside was a new ring, delicate gold set with a deep green emerald surrounded by small diamonds. It was nothing like the heavy gold band she'd removed. This was beautiful, personal, chosen rather than inherited. I had it made 3 days ago, Adrian said quietly. After the assembly, when I realized I was losing you. The emerald reminded me of your eyes, and the design, I worked with the jeweler to create something that belonged to you alone. Not Elise, not my mother, not the Blackthorne legacy. Just you. Tears burned in Lillian's eyes. You had this made before Lady Marguerite came. Yes, before I defended you to her, before Annie's rescue. I'd already decided I wanted to change. Today just made it impossible to delay any longer. He held the ring between them, not putting it on her finger, not assuming anything. I'm not asking you to wear it, not yet. I know I haven't earned that right, but I wanted you to know. I see you, Lillian, finally, completely, and I'm terrified by how much I want you to stay. The vulnerability in his voice broke something open in her chest. This was the man she'd hoped for, dreamed of, present, honest, fighting for her instead of against her. But hope was still dangerous. Trust, once broken, didn't heal overnight. I'll think about it, she whispered. That's all I ask. He closed the box and placed it on her bedside table, then rose to leave. Adrian? He paused at the door. Thank you. For today. For all of it. Thank you for crawling into a tree to save a child you'd never met. Thank you for being braver than I've ever been. After he left, Lillian sat staring at the velvet box for a long time. Part of her wanted to open it, to try on the ring, to let herself believe in the possibility of happiness. But the wiser part, the part that had survived 2 years of abandonment, whispered caution. One beautiful gesture didn't erase years of pain. One moment of honesty didn't guarantee lasting change. She left the box untouched and lay down to rest, her body aching from the day's drama, her heart even more battered and uncertain than before. Outside her window, the winter sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and blood. And somewhere in the depths of Ironvale Manor, Adrian Blackthorne sat alone in his study, staring at a portrait of Elise Moreland he'd kept hidden in his desk drawer for 5 years, finally ready to put it away for good. And somewhere in the depths of Ironvale Manor, Adrian Blackthorne sat alone in his study, staring at a portrait of Elise Moreland he'd kept hidden in his desk drawer for 5 years, finally ready to put it away for good. His hand trembled as he lifted the miniature painting, barely larger than his palm, Elise's face captured in perfect detail by a master portraitist who'd somehow caught the mischief in her eyes, the curve of her smile. He'd commissioned it during their engagement, carried it through her illness and death, kept it close like a talisman against forgetting. For 5 years, looking at this portrait had been both agony and comfort, a way to keep her alive, to maintain the shrine of his grief. Now, looking at it, he felt something different. Not the sharp pain of fresh loss, but a duller, older ache. Elise was frozen at 22, forever young, forever perfect in his memory. But he'd aged, changed, survived. And the woman sleeping in the East Wing had shown him what it meant to be alive again. Adrian opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he kept locked, the one that held personal papers and private things. He placed the portrait inside, face down, and closed the drawer with a sense of finality that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Goodbye, Elise," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm sorry it took me so long." The next morning, he began the hard work of proving himself. It started at breakfast. Lillian entered the small dining room to find Adrian already there. Not unusual anymore, but this time he'd clearly been waiting for her. He stood when she entered, pulled out her chair himself, and poured her tea exactly as she liked it. Strong, with a touch of honey, no milk. She raised an eyebrow. "You know how I take my tea?" "I've been paying attention, finally." He returned to his seat, and she noticed he'd brought the estate ledgers with him. "I thought we might review the quarterly accounts together. Your work with the Charitable Society has given you insight into tenant needs that I've been missing. I'd value your opinion." Lillian set down her teacup carefully. This was unprecedented. Adrian had guarded estate business like military secrets, never once suggesting she had anything valuable to contribute. "You want my opinion on estate management?" "I want your partnership." He met her eyes directly, something he'd only recently begun doing consistently. "This is your estate too. Your tenants. Your responsibility. I've been acting like the manor runs on my decisions alone, but today proved that wrong." "Today?" "The Coopers came by at dawn to thank you, again, and to tell me that every tenant family within 5 miles has heard about what you did, about how the Duchess risked her own safety to save a child." He paused, something like wonder in his voice. "They love you, Lillian. In one afternoon, you did what I've failed to do in 10 years of being Duke. You made them believe you actually care about them as people, not just as sources of income and productivity." She didn't know what to say to that. The praise felt strange, disorienting. Adrian pushed the ledgers toward her. "So I'm asking, help me be better at this. Teach me to see what you see." They spent the next 2 hours reviewing accounts, discussing improvements to tenant housing, debating the allocation of resources. Adrian listened when she spoke, asked genuine questions, even changed his position on several matters based on her arguments. It felt like a conversation between equals rather than a duke humoring his decorative wife. "The well near the Hartley farm needs replacing," Lillian said, pointing to a notation. "The children have been getting sick from the water. Mrs. Hartley mentioned it at the Charitable Society meeting, but she was afraid to bring it to your attention directly." "Why would she be afraid?" "Because you're the Duke. You're intimidating. She didn't think you'd care about one family's well when you have an entire estate to manage." Adrian's face darkened with something that looked like shame. "Schedule the repair for this week. And Lillian, I want you to tell me about these kinds of concerns directly. The tenants might be afraid to approach me, but you shouldn't be." "I wasn't afraid. I just didn't think you'd listen." "I'm listening now." And he was. That was the startling thing. This wasn't performance or temporary guilt. He was genuinely trying. Over the next days and weeks, Adrian's efforts continued with stubborn consistency. He joined her for every meal unless business required his absence, and when he had to miss one, he sent word explaining why. He asked about her painting, actually looked at her work in the conservatory, and commissioned additional supplies from London. He accompanied her to Charitable Society meetings, standing awkwardly at the back, while the women discussed distribution of winter provisions and education programs. "You don't have to come to these," Lillian told him after the third meeting. "It's women's work. You've been coming to estate meetings. Seems only fair I learn about this side of running Ironvale." He glanced at the group of women, who were pointedly not staring at the Duke's unprecedented presence. "Besides, Lady Pemberton is terrifying. I'm learning things about organization and logistics that would improve my own operations." Lillian hid a smile. Lady Pemberton was indeed formidable, and watching her efficiently bully Adrian into donating additional funds for the village school was unexpectedly entertaining. But it wasn't all smooth progress. There were awkward moments, misunderstandings, and the persistent challenge of two people who'd lived as strangers trying to build intimacy from scratch. One evening, Adrian appeared at her chambers carrying a book. "I thought you might like this. It's a new publication on watercolor techniques from a French master. Patterson mentioned you'd been experimenting with light effects." Lillian took the book, genuinely touched. "You asked Patterson about my painting?" "I asked everyone. Mary, Mrs. Thornberry, even the undergardener who maintains the conservatory. I realized I know nothing about you, about what makes you happy or what you dream about, so I'm learning." It was sweet. It was also slightly overwhelming. "Adrian, you don't have to interrogate the staff to understand me. You could just ask me directly." "I'm afraid of asking wrong questions, or asking right questions and not knowing what to do with the answers." The vulnerability in his admission made her chest ache. This powerful, aristocratic man who commanded an estate and moved through society with absolute confidence was utterly at sea when it came to genuine emotional connection. "Ask anyway," she said softly. "I'll tell you if a question is wrong." He sat in the chair by her fire, another unprecedented intimacy being in her private chambers in the evening, and they talked. Actually talked. About her childhood, her early love of art, her mother's letters, her dreams before the marriage had crushed them. And slowly, carefully, Adrian began sharing too. About the suffocating expectations of being a duke's heir, the pressure to be perfect, the way Elise had been the first person who'd seen him as Adrian, rather than as the future Duke of Blackthorne, about how her death had felt like losing the only person who truly knew him. "I understand why you loved her," Lillian said, "and I don't expect you to just stop, but I need to know. Can you make room for me alongside those memories, or will I always be competing with a ghost I can never defeat?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know yet, but I'm trying to find out, and I promise you this, I won't keep using her memory as an excuse to avoid living." It was honest, not what she wanted to hear maybe, but honest. And she was learning that honesty mattered more than pretty lies. The velvet box with the emerald ring remained on her bedside table, unopened. Adrian never mentioned it, never pressured her, but she caught him glancing at it sometimes, measuring her bare finger with something like hope in his eyes. 3 weeks after the fire, Ironvale hosted a dinner for several neighboring families, a tradition Adrian had maintained mechanically for years. This time, though, Lillian insisted on being involved in the planning. "I want to sit beside you," she told him the morning of the dinner. Not at the opposite end of the table, not as far away as possible while maintaining the fiction of unity. "Beside you." He looked up from his correspondence. "People will notice the change. Let them notice, let them see that the Blackthorne marriage is different than it was." "Is it different?" She met his eyes steadily. "You tell me." Adrian set down his pen and crossed to where she stood. He stopped close enough that she could feel his warmth, could see the fine lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair at the temples. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's different. You're different. I'm different. Everything is different." "Good." That evening, when their guests arrived, the new seating arrangement drew immediate attention. Lillian in emerald silk, the same shade as the ring she still hadn't worn, sitting at Adrian's right hand instead of in exile at the table's far end. Their shoulders nearly touched. When he reached for the wine, his arm brushed hers, and neither moved away. Lord Pemberton, observing this with barely concealed delight, raised his glass. "To our hosts. It's wonderful to see the Duke and Duchess so unified." Unified. It was a diplomatic word for the obvious shift in their dynamic. Lady Pemberton caught Lillian's eye and smiled with warm approval. But not everyone was pleased. Lady Hartwick, an older woman known for her sharp tongue and conservative views, watched the evening's interactions with growing disapproval. "Tell me, Duchess," she said when conversation lulled between courses, "I understand you've been taking quite an active role in estate affairs lately. Charity work, tenant visits, even advising on agricultural matters. Rather ambitious for someone so inexperienced." The table quieted. Everyone recognized a challenge when they heard one. Lillian set down her fork calmly. "I prefer to think of it as taking responsibility for my position rather than treating it as a decorative title. But surely such matters are best left to those with proper training. The Duke has years of experience managing Ironvale. Your interference could disrupt carefully established systems." "Is that what you think I'm doing? Interfering?" Lady Hartwick smiled thinly. "I'm simply concerned that enthusiasm without expertise can cause more harm than good." Before Lillian could respond, Adrian's voice cut through the tension. "Actually, Lady Hartwick, the Duchess's involvement has improved estate operations significantly. Her work with the Charitable Society identified several infrastructure problems I'd overlooked. The tenant satisfaction has increased measurably since she began her visits." "I'm sure the Duke is being generous. I'm being accurate." Adrian's tone was pleasant but implacable. "My wife has proven to be a valuable partner in managing Ironvale. Her perspective has been enlightening." Lady Hartwick's eyes narrowed. "How lovely that you found common ground. Though I must say, I remember a time when the Duke valued different qualities in a wife. Quiet dignity, for instance. Deference to her husband's superior judgment. The reference to Elise was barely veiled. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Lillian felt Adrian tense beside her, but before he could respond, she placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of solidarity that didn't escape notice. I'm sure many wives find fulfillment in quiet dignity and deference, Lillian said evenly, but I prefer active partnership and mutual respect. Call it a modern approach. Modern? Lady Hartwick made it sound like profanity. Yes, I suppose removing one's wedding ring and making a spectacle at public assemblies could be called modern. Dead silence fell across the table. Everyone stared at Lillian's bare left hand. Lady Hartwick, Lord Pemberton said sharply, that's hardly appropriate dinner conversation. No, it's fine. Lillian's voice was steady, though her heart raced. This was the confrontation she'd known was coming, the moment when her choices would be publicly judged. You're right. I did remove my ring because it symbolized a marriage that existed only on paper. I won't wear it again until it represents something real. Gasps rippled around the table. Even friendly faces looked shocked at such brutal honesty. And does it? Lady Hartwick pressed, clearly hoping to humiliate her further. Represent something real? Adrian's hand covered Lillian's on his arm. That's between my wife and myself. But I'll say this. The Duchess has shown more courage and integrity in the past month than I've managed in years. If she judges our marriage unworthy of her ring, the fault lies entirely with me. More shocked silence. Dukes didn't admit fault publicly. They didn't defend their wives by acknowledging their own failures. Adrian, you don't have to, Lillian started. Yes, I do. He addressed the entire table now, his voice carrying quiet authority. I think everyone here knows I've been a poor husband. I've been distant, cold, trapped in the past. My wife deserved better than what I gave her. She still does. And the fact that she's given me an opportunity to change, to become worthy of her, is a gift I don't take lightly. Lady Pemberton pressed her napkin to her lips, clearly moved. Even Lord Hartwick looked approving. But Lady Hartwick wasn't finished. How very touching, though I wonder if this newfound devotion will last once the novelty wears off. Grief and first love have a way of reasserting themselves. Perhaps you're right, Adrian said. Perhaps I'll always carry some grief for what I lost. But I've learned the difference between honoring a memory and being imprisoned by it. And I choose freedom. I choose the future. I choose my wife. Lillian's breath caught. These were the words she'd needed to hear, not in private, where they could be dismissed as momentary sentiment, but publicly, before witnesses, as a declaration of intent. The dinner resumed with stilted conversation, Lady Hartwick thoroughly put in her place, but still radiating disapproval. When the evening finally ended and their guests departed, Lillian and Adrian stood together in the entrance hall, watching the last carriage disappear into the darkness. You didn't have to humiliate yourself like that, Lillian said quietly. I wasn't humiliated. I was honest. He turned to face her. And I meant every word. I choose you, Lillian. I choose this marriage. I choose the possibility of happiness over the certainty of endless mourning. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly she ached with it. I need time, she whispered, to trust this, to trust you. I know, take all the time you need, but the next morning brought a test neither of them anticipated. Lillian was in the conservatory painting when Mrs. Thornberry appeared, her face grave. Your Grace, there's a gentleman here to see you. A Mr. Hartwell. He says he's your brother. Lillian's brush clattered to the floor. James? James is here? She hadn't seen her younger brother in over a year. The Hartwell family had distanced themselves after her marriage, embarrassed by the obvious failure of the match they'd helped arrange. Her parents had written occasionally, but James, wild, reckless James, had disappeared into London society and hadn't bothered to maintain contact. She found him in the drawing room, looking older and more dissipated than she remembered. At 21, he had the tired eyes of someone who'd lived too hard and too fast. Lillian! He didn't rise, didn't show proper respect. You're looking well. Marriage to a duke agrees with you. What are you doing here, James? Can't a brother visit his sister? You've had 2 years to visit. Why now? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm in a bit of trouble. Need some financial assistance. Thought perhaps your husband might be willing to help family. Understanding crashed over her. You need money. That's why you're here. Not just money. A lot of money. I made some poor investments. Got in with the wrong people. I owe substantial debts to some very unpleasant creditors. How much? £5,000. Lillian sank into a chair. £5,000 was a fortune. You gambled away £5,000? Not just gambling, failed business ventures, bad loans, but the effect is the same. If I don't pay within the month, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? The kind that involve debtor's prison, or worse. Despite everything, despite the years of neglect, despite his transparent manipulation, Lillian felt a pang of concern. James was irresponsible and selfish, but he was still her brother. I'll speak with Adrian. Will he help? I've heard rumors about your marriage, that you're barely on speaking terms. Those rumors are outdated. She found Adrian in his study, reviewing correspondence. When she explained the situation, his expression darkened. £5,000 is substantial. I know. And from what you've told me about your brother, he's unlikely to learn from this. We pay his debts now. He'll create new ones within a year. Probably. Adrian set down his papers and studied her carefully. What do you want to do? The question surprised her. A month ago, he would have made the decision unilaterally. Now he was asking her opinion on family matters that directly affected her. I don't know, she admitted. He's my brother. I can't just let him go to debtor's prison. But you're right. Giving him money without consequences will only enable his recklessness. Then we find a middle path. Adrian stood and came around the desk. I'll pay his debts. But in exchange, he comes to work at Ironvale for 2 years. Estate management, agricultural work, learning actual responsibility. Room and board provided, small allowance for personal expenses, but no access to London society or gambling establishments. Lillian blinked. You do that. He's your family. That makes him my responsibility too. He touched her cheek gently. And honestly, I could use someone to manage the Western tenant farms. If he proves reliable, it could become a permanent position. If not, at least we've given him a chance to change. It was generous, more than James deserved, and it showed that Adrian understood the difference between enabling bad behavior and offering genuine help. He won't like it. I don't care if he likes it. Those are the terms. Take them or face his creditors alone. When they presented the offer to James, his face went through several emotions: relief, calculation, resentment, resignation. 2 years? 2 years, Adrian confirmed. You'll work alongside our estate manager, learning how to actually run a profitable operation. At the end of that time, if you've proven yourself, we'll discuss permanent employment or helping you establish your own enterprise. If you haven't, you'll be on your own. James looked at Lillian. And you agree with this? Condemning your brother to manual labor? I agree with giving you a chance to become someone worth knowing, Lillian said firmly, which you're certainly not right now. The bluntness seemed to shock him more than the work requirement. Fine, he muttered. I accept. Excellent, Adrian said. Patterson will show you to your quarters. You start tomorrow at dawn. After James left, Adrian pulled Lillian into his arms. Another first, an embrace that felt natural rather than awkward. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For what? For not making me choose between you and my family. For finding a solution that helps James without enabling him. For asking what I wanted instead of just deciding. That's what partners do. He pulled back to look at her. Though I have to say, watching you tell your brother he's not worth knowing was extraordinarily attractive. She laughed, surprised by the warmth that flooded through her. Was it? Absolutely. You're magnificent when you're brutally honest. I learned from watching you face down Lady Marguerite. We make a good team. They did. That was the revelation. In just a few weeks of actually trying, they developed a partnership that felt genuine. Not romantic love yet, but respect, collaboration, the beginnings of real affection. That evening, Lillian sat in her chambers staring at the velvet box on her bedside table. She'd been avoiding it, treating the decision about the ring as some enormous, life-altering choice. But maybe it didn't have to be. Maybe she could accept the ring not as a promise of perfect happiness, but as acknowledgement of progress, of genuine effort, of a marriage that was finally becoming real. She opened the box. The emerald glowed in the lamplight, deep green shot through with fire. It was beautiful, personal, chosen with care. She slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. The next morning, she wore it to breakfast. Adrian saw it immediately. He stopped halfway to the table, his eyes fixed on her left hand. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. "It's beautiful," Lillian said softly. "Thank you." He crossed to her in 3 strides and kissed her. Not the chaste, formal kiss they'd exchanged at their wedding, but something real and urgent and full of desperate hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "No," she agreed. "But you're trying to become someone who might, and that's enough. For now." The household noticed the ring immediately, of course. Servants whispered excitedly, Mrs. Thornbury beamed, and when Lady Pemberton heard the news, she sent an enormous bouquet of flowers with a note reading simply, "About time." Word spread through the county with impressive speed. The Blackthorne marriage, it seemed, was no longer the subject of pitying gossip, but of genuine interest and, increasingly, approval. Even the tenants noticed the change. The Duke and Duchess were seen together now, walking the estate, visiting farms, attending village events as a united front. Adrian's cold distance had thawed into something warmer. Lillian's invisible status had transformed into visible, active partnership. 2 months after she'd removed her original wedding ring, Lillian stood in the conservatory putting finishing touches on a landscape painting, rolling hills in summer, wildflowers blooming, sunlight breaking through clouds. Adrian appeared in the doorway, and she turned to find him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, something soft and wondering. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "I'm trying to remember when I started falling in love with you. Was it watching you crawl into a tree to save a child? Seeing you face down Lady Marguerite? The moment you told me you deserved to be seen?" He crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. "Or maybe it was the first time I actually looked at you, really looked, and saw the strongest person I'd ever met." Her heart stuttered. "You love me?" "I'm terrified by how much. I've spent years afraid to feel anything real, and now I feel everything. It's overwhelming and wonderful, and I don't know what to do with it except tell you the truth. I love you, Lillian, not as a replacement for what I lost, not as a convenient duchess, but as yourself, as the woman who refused to stay invisible." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't know if I love you yet. I know, but I think I could. I think I'm already starting to." "That's enough. More than enough." He kissed her again, and this time she let herself sink into it. Let herself feel the possibility of real happiness, of a marriage that had been forged in isolation and pain, but had emerged as something genuine. When they finally broke apart, Lillian noticed something on the table behind Adrian, a wooden box she'd never seen before. "What's that?" He looked almost embarrassed. "A gift. I wanted to wait until you were ready, but patience has never been my strong suit." Inside the box was a complete set of professional artist supplies, brushes, paints, canvases, everything she could possibly need, all the finest quality, carefully selected. "Adrian, this must have cost—" "I don't care what it cost. You have real talent, Lillian. You should pursue it seriously, not just as a hobby, but as an artist." He pulled out a letter from beneath the supplies. "This is an introduction to the Royal Academy. They're hosting a women's exhibition next spring. I've arranged for you to submit work for consideration." She stared at him, overwhelmed. "You did this for me?" "I want you to have everything you deserve, everything I failed to give you before. A real life, real opportunities, real partnership." Lillian set down the letter and wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finally seeing me, for changing, for trying. Thank you for not giving up on me when you had every reason to." They stood together in the conservatory, surrounded by light and growing things, and for the first time since her arrival at Ironvale Manor, Lillian felt truly at home. The invisible Duchess had become impossible to ignore, and the frozen Duke had learned, finally, what it meant to truly see the woman standing beside him. And the frozen Duke had learned, finally, what it meant to truly see the woman standing beside him. Spring came early to Ironvale Manor that year, as if the land itself sensed the change in its masters and responded with new life. The gardens exploded with color, the tenant farms flourished under James's surprisingly competent management, and the manor that had felt like a mausoleum for so long now hummed with warmth and purpose. Lillian stood in the conservatory, her conservatory, she thought of it now, putting final touches on the painting she'd chosen for the Royal Academy submission. It depicted Ironvale at dawn, light breaking over the hills, transforming shadow into gold. A metaphor so obvious it was almost embarrassing, but also deeply true. "You're frowning at it," Adrian said from the doorway. "That's either very good or very bad." She stepped back, tilting her head critically. "I don't know if it's good enough. It's extraordinary." He came to stand beside her, his arm sliding naturally around her waist, a casual intimacy that still sometimes surprised her with its ease. "But you're terrified, so you're looking for flaws." "I'm not terrified." "Liar." He kissed her temple. "You're about to show your work to the most prestigious art institution in the country. You're allowed to be terrified." She leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. In the 4 months since she'd put on the emerald ring, they'd built something she'd never quite believed possible, a real marriage. Not perfect, not without the occasional stumble or misunderstanding, but real, built on respect and growing love rather than duty and resentment. What if they reject it? Then you'll submit again next year and the year after that, until they're forced to acknowledge what I already know, that you're brilliant. His faith in her was still startling. The man who'd barely acknowledged her existence now championed her ambitions with fierce pride. "Adrian?" She turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for all of this, for changing, for giving us a chance." "You gave me a chance. I just finally got smart enough to take it." Their kiss was interrupted by a discreet cough from the doorway. Mrs. Thornberry stood there, looking apologetic but determined. "Forgive the interruption, Your Graces, but there's a situation in the village that requires immediate attention." Lillian felt Adrian tense. "What kind of situation?" "The Moreland family, ma'am, Lady Marguerite specifically. She's at the village church making rather serious accusations about the Duchess." Ice flooded Lillian's veins. They hadn't heard from Lady Marguerite since Adrian had thrown her out of Ironvale 4 months ago. Lillian had hoped the woman had finally accepted defeat and moved on. Apparently not. "What accusations?" Adrian's voice had gone dangerously soft. "She's claiming that Your Grace has been, forgive me, this is indelicate, that you've been conducting an affair with Lord Ashford. She's showing people letters she claims are proof of infidelity." The accusation was so absurd that Lillian almost laughed. Lord Ashford was 63 years old, happily married, and treated her with avuncular kindness. The idea of an affair was ludicrous. But Adrian wasn't laughing. His face had gone pale with rage. "She's doing this publicly? In the village?" "Yes, Your Grace. She's gathered quite a crowd. The vicar is trying to calm the situation, but she's quite insistent." "We're going to the village," Adrian said flatly. "Now." They rode together in the carriage. Adrian's jaw clenched so tight, Lillian worried he might crack his teeth. She'd seen him angry before, but this was different. This was protective fury on her behalf, and while part of her appreciated it, another part worried about what he might do. "Adrian, we need to handle this carefully." "Carefully? That woman has been tormenting you since before we were married. She assaulted you in our home, and now she's publicly slandering you with invented affair rumors?" "I'm done being careful." "I know you're angry. I'm furious, and I'm done letting her weaponize her grief to hurt you." The village square was indeed crowded when they arrived. Lady Marguerite stood on the church steps, dressed in black like an avenging widow, holding what appeared to be letters. A crowd of villagers and minor gentry surrounded her, some looking scandalized, others openly skeptical. The crowd parted when Adrian and Lillian emerged from the carriage. Whispers rippled through the assembly. "Lady Marguerite!" Adrian's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "What exactly are you doing?" She turned, and Lillian saw something wild in her eyes. Grief had twisted into obsession, and obsession into madness. "I'm exposing the truth about your wife, about the kind of woman who's displaced my Elise's memory. By inventing an affair that never happened? I have proof." She waved the letters. Love notes exchanged between the Duchess and Lord Ashford, explicit descriptions of their assignations, evidence of her corruption. "Let me see those letters," Lillian said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady despite the pounding of her heart. Lady Marguerite clutched them to her chest. I'll show them to everyone. They'll see what kind of woman you really are. Then show them. Read them aloud right now. The crowd murmured with interest. This was drama beyond anything the village had seen in years. Lady Marguerite unfolded the first letter with trembling hands and began to read. My darling, I count the hours until we can be together again. Your husband suspects nothing. We must be careful, but my love for you burns brighter than caution. Stop. Lillian's command was sharp enough to cut through the reading. That's not my handwriting. Of course you'd deny it. Anyone who's seen my actual correspondence can verify. Mrs. Thornberry, you've handled my letters for 2 years. Is that my hand? The housekeeper stepped forward from the crowd and examined the letter Lady Marguerite held. No, Your Grace. Your writing slants left and has distinctive loops. This slants right, and the letter formation is completely different. She could have disguised her hand. Lady Marguerite started desperately. The paper, Adrian said, his voice ice cold. That's not our stationery. Our paper has a watermark, the Blackthorne crest. Those letters are written on common paper available at any shop. Lord Ashford himself pushed through the crowd, his florid face red with embarrassment and anger. This is preposterous. I've never exchanged romantic correspondence with Her Grace. We barely speak beyond pleasantries at social gatherings. You would deny it to protect her. I'm denying it because it's a damned lie, Ashford's booming voice carried across the square. My wife knows every letter I send and receive. There are no secret correspondences. This is obvious fabrication. The crowd's mood was shifting. Skepticism was hardening into disapproval. Not of Lillian, but of Lady Marguerite. She's lying! Lady Marguerite's voice rose to a shriek. She's corrupted you all, made you blind to her true nature. The only corruption here, Lillian said quietly, is grief twisted into cruelty. I'm sorry for your loss, Lady Marguerite. Truly. Losing a child must be unbearable. But your daughter has been dead for 5 years, and you're using her memory to justify attacking innocent people. Don't you dare speak about Elise. You're not worthy to say her name. Perhaps not. But I'm also not going to let you destroy my reputation with obvious forgeries because you can't accept that the world kept turning after she died. You replaced her. You took everything that should have been hers. I replaced no one. I married a man whose father arranged a match for dynasty purposes, the same way thousands of aristocratic marriages are arranged. Elise's death was a tragedy, but it doesn't give you ownership over Adrian's future. He loved her. He still loves her. Loved, Adrian said, stepping forward to stand beside Lillian. Past tense. And yes, I probably always will carry some love for what we had, but I'm in love with my wife now. Not with a memory. Not with the past. With the extraordinary woman standing beside me. Lady Marguerite's face crumpled. No, you can't. You promised Elise. I promised her I'd try to be happy, and I finally am. I'm sorry that causes you pain, but I won't keep punishing myself and my wife to make your grief more comfortable. But she's nothing compared to Elise. She's everything Elise never had the chance to become. She's brave and kind and stronger than anyone I've ever known, and I'm grateful every day that she gave me a chance I absolutely didn't deserve. The crowd was openly weeping now, at least the women were. This was better than any theatrical performance, real emotion laid bare in the village square. Lady Marguerite stood trembling, tears streaming down her face. I have nothing left. You were my last connection to her. Our grief was supposed to bind us, and now you've chosen this replacement over my daughter's memory. He's chosen life over death, Lillian said gently. And you should too. Elise wouldn't want you destroying yourself like this. She wouldn't want you attacking innocent people in her name. You don't know what she'd want. You never knew her. You're right, but I know what grief can do, how it can consume everything until there's nothing left but anger and pain. I've watched it. I've lived in its shadow. And I'm telling you, there's a way forward that doesn't require destroying everyone around you. Forward to what? A life without her? A life that honors her by choosing beauty and connection instead of bitterness and isolation. For a moment, Lady Marguerite just stared at Lillian. Then something seemed to break inside her. She collapsed onto the church steps, sobbing. Not elegant tears, but ugly, wrenching grief that had been bottled up for years. Lillian exchanged a glance with Adrian, then approached the older woman slowly. She sat beside her on the stone steps, and after a moment's hesitation, put an arm around her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for your loss, for your pain, for everything." Lady Marguerite sobbed against her shoulder while the village watched in stunned silence. The woman who'd come to destroy Lillian was being comforted by her intended victim. When the storm of weeping finally subsided, Lady Marguerite pulled back, looking exhausted and somehow smaller. "I've made a terrible mistake," she whispered. "Several," Lillian agreed. "But grief does that. Makes us into people we wouldn't normally be. I was so angry. At the world. At fate. At you for being alive when she wasn't. It consumed me. I know. But it doesn't have to keep consuming you." Lady Marguerite looked up at Adrian, shame written across her face. "I've been cruel to both of you. Unforgivably cruel." "Yes," Adrian said bluntly. "You have. But you're also a woman who lost her daughter far too young. I understand that kind of pain, even if I can't excuse what you've done. Can you forgive me?" Adrian looked at Lillian, clearly leaving the decision to her. This was her injury to forgive or not. Lillian thought about the past 2 years, about the casual cruelties, the assault in the drawing room, this public attempt at destroying her reputation, about all the pain this woman had caused, directly and indirectly. But she also thought about the hollow look in Lady Marguerite's eyes, the way grief had twisted her into someone unrecognizable, the terrible loneliness of loving someone who was gone forever. "On one condition," Lillian said finally, "you get help, real help. Not just wallowing in grief, but actually working to heal. There's a woman in London, a widow who runs a support group for those who've lost family. Lady Pemberton has her details. You attend, you work on yourself, you stop using your daughter's memory as a weapon." Lady Marguerite nodded shakily. "I'll try. That's all any of us can do." The vicar stepped forward, offering to escort Lady Marguerite home. As she left, leaning on his arm, she paused to look back at Lillian and Adrian. "She would have liked you," she said quietly. "Elise, she would have appreciated your strength, your refusal to be diminished." Then she was gone, leaving Lillian and Adrian standing before the assembled village. Adrian turned to address the crowd. "I apologize that you were subjected to this spectacle, and I want to make something absolutely clear. The accusations against my wife are complete fabrications. She has been faithful, honorable, and frankly far more patient with my family's drama than anyone should have to be." "Hear, hear," someone called from the crowd. Others echoed the sentiment. "Furthermore, I want to publicly acknowledge what many of you already know, that the Duchess of Ironvale has done more for this community in 6 months than I managed in 10 years. She sees you as people, not just tenants. She cares about your welfare as individuals, and I'm grateful to have her as my partner." Applause broke out, genuine and warm. Mrs. Cooper pushed through the crowd carrying little Annie, who waved shyly at Lillian. "3 cheers for the Duchess," someone shouted, and the crowd erupted in enthusiastic cheers that echoed across the square. Lillian felt tears prick her eyes. These people, the tenants she'd visited, the families she'd helped, the community she'd slowly become part of, they were celebrating her, defending her, claiming her as one of their own. After the crowd dispersed, Adrian pulled her into his arms right there in the square, kissing her thoroughly despite the audience. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her lips, facing her down like that, offering forgiveness when she deserved none. "You continually amaze me. I learned from watching you. You could have destroyed her today. Instead, you acknowledged her pain while defending me. That's real strength. We make a good team. The best." They rode back to Ironvale in comfortable silence, hands intertwined. The crisis had passed, and in its wake, Lillian felt something settle into place. This was her home now. These were her people. This was her life. Not the one she'd imagined as a girl, but something better. Something real. The weeks that followed brought more changes, all of them good. Lillian's painting was accepted into the Royal Academy exhibition, creating a small scandal. Duchesses didn't usually exhibit publicly, but also genuine admiration for her skill. The exhibition opened in late spring, and Adrian insisted they travel to London for the event. The gallery was crowded with London's artistic elite when they arrived. Lillian felt her stomach churning with nerves as they moved through the rooms, past landscapes and portraits and still lifes, until they reached her piece. A small crowd had gathered before it. People were actually looking at her work, discussing it. One woman pointed to the way Lillian had captured the light, another praised the emotional resonance. "The artist is here," Adrian announced proudly to no one in particular. "My wife, the Duchess of Blackthorne." Several people turned, and Lillian found herself suddenly surrounded by questions and compliments. A critic from the Times wanted an interview. A gallery owner asked about future work. A duchess she'd never met praised the technical skill. "This is extraordinary," the gallery owner said. "Have you considered a solo exhibition?" Lillian glanced at Adrian, who was grinning like he'd personally hung the moon. I might be interested." "Excellent. Let's discuss terms." The evening stretched long and wonderful. Lillian found herself talking about art with people who took her seriously, who saw her as an artist rather than just a titled lady with a hobby. Adrian stayed close, providing support when she needed it, but never overshadowing her moment. When they finally returned to their London townhouse, Adrian had opened it specifically for this trip, filling it with servants and making it a real home rather than bachelor quarters. Lillian felt dizzy with success and champagne. "Did that really just happen?" she asked, collapsing onto the settee in their private sitting room. "You're officially a recognized artist." Adrian sat beside her, pulling her against him. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying, exhilarating, completely surreal. You deserve every bit of recognition they gave you. Your talent has nothing to do with your title." She turned to look at him, this man who'd been a stranger, then an enemy, then slowly, miraculously, a partner and lover. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd spend the rest of my days being invisible in a house that would never feel like home. And now? Now I'm an exhibiting artist married to a man I'm genuinely in love with. Now I have a home and a community, and a future I actually want to live." She touched his face gently. "You gave me that. By finally seeing me. By changing. By choosing to live instead of just existing. We gave each other that. You forced me to change by refusing to stay invisible, by demanding to be seen. I just finally got smart enough to open my eyes." They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of two people who'd fought hard for their happiness and weren't taking a moment for granted. Later, wrapped in sheets and each other, Lillian traced the emerald ring on her finger. "Do you remember the first time you gave me a ring?" "At our wedding. You looked terrified." "I was, marrying a stranger who clearly wished I was someone else. And now? Now I'm glad you're not still grieving. But I'm also glad you loved Elise once. It taught you how to love deeply. You just needed to remember how to direct it towards someone living." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I visited her grave last month, first time in years. I wanted to tell her about you, about how I'd finally moved forward." "What did you say?" "That I was sorry for using her memory as an excuse to stop living. That I hoped she'd forgive me for being happy with someone else. And that I thought she'd like you. Which was strange because I realized I actually believed it. If she were alive, if circumstances were different, I think you two might have been friends." Lillian felt tears sting her eyes. "That's a beautiful thought. You're both strong women who refuse to be diminished. She would have respected that." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Lillian woke in the morning, she found Adrian already awake, watching her with an expression of such love it made her breath catch. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning, love." He kissed her softly. "I have something to ask you." "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just significant." He sat up, suddenly looking nervous in a way she'd rarely seen. "I want to marry you again." Lillian blinked. "We're already married." "Legally, yes. But that ceremony was a business transaction. Two strangers fulfilling family obligations. I want to marry you for real. With vows we choose ourselves. With a celebration that's about us, not duty. With our friends and family witnessing something genuine." Her heart swelled. "You want a second wedding?" "I want to stand before you and promise to see you, honor you, and love you for the rest of my life. I want you to make promises you actually mean. I want to start our marriage over, properly this time." "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Yes, absolutely yes. They planned the ceremony for summer at Ironvale's small chapel. It would be intimate, just close friends, family, and tenants. No society spectacle, no forced celebration, just two people who'd found their way to each other through the wreckage of grief and duty. James gave her away, looking healthier and more grounded than Lillian had ever seen him. 2 years managing the Western farms had transformed her brother from a dissipated gambler into someone capable and responsible. "You were right," he whispered as they walked down the aisle. "I needed to become someone worth knowing. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for actually trying to change." Adrian waited at the altar, and when their eyes met, Lillian saw her entire future reflected there. Not perfect, not without challenges, but filled with love and partnership and the kind of happiness she'd stopped believing was possible. The vicar invited them to speak their vows. Adrian went first, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Lillian, 2 years ago I stood here and made promises I didn't mean. I gave you a ring I didn't understand the weight of. I bound myself to you while wishing you were someone else, and I'm ashamed of that man I was." He took her hands, and she felt him trembling slightly. "Today I stand here fully present. I see you, your strength, your compassion, your talent, your refusal to be diminished. I see the woman who saved a child she didn't know, who stood up to cruel accusations with grace, who forgave when she had every right to stay angry. I promise to keep seeing you every day for the rest of our lives, to be your partner in all things, to honor your dreams as much as my own, to love you not as a replacement for what I lost, but as the remarkable person you are." Tears streamed down Lillian's face as she began her own vows. "Adrian, when we first married, I thought I could earn your love through patience and kindness. I thought if I was good enough, quiet enough, invisible enough, you might eventually notice me. I was wrong." She squeezed his hands. "I didn't earn your love by shrinking. I earned it by refusing to disappear, by demanding to be seen, by reclaiming my life and my dignity. You taught me that real love doesn't come from making yourself small. It comes from being brave enough to be fully yourself and finding someone who loves you for it." Her voice strengthened. "I promise to keep being brave, to keep taking up space, to keep challenging you when you slip back into old patterns, and to love you not despite your flaws and grief, but as a whole person who's done the hard work of healing. We're not perfect, but we're real, and that's everything." When the vicar pronounced them married, again, Adrian kissed her with such passion that several guests laughed and applauded. The celebration afterward was joyful and genuine. The tenants danced with the gentry, children ran shrieking through the gardens, and for the first time in years, Ironvale Manor rang with unrestrained happiness. Late in the evening, Lillian found Lady Marguerite standing alone near the rose garden. The older woman had attended at Lillian's invitation, looking fragile but more present than she'd been in years. "Thank you for coming," Lillian said gently. "Thank you for inviting me. After everything I did, you're working on healing. That's what matters." Lillian paused, then added, "There's something I want to show you." She led Lady Marguerite to the manor's portrait gallery, where a new painting hung, a portrait of Elise Morland that Lillian had painted from descriptions and the miniature Adrian had finally shared. Lady Marguerite gasped, tears filling her eyes. "That's her, that's my Elise." "I wanted her to have a place here, not as a ghost we're all trying to forget, but as someone who mattered, who shaped Adrian into someone capable of deep love. Without her, he wouldn't have known how to love me. This is incredibly generous. It's honest. She was part of his life, part of what made him who he is. I'm not threatened by that anymore." Lady Marguerite studied the portrait for a long moment. "She would have liked you," she repeated, "and she would have been happy that Adrian found love again. I should have remembered that about her. She was never cruel or possessive. She wanted people to be happy. Then let's honor her by choosing happiness ourselves." They stood together in companionable silence, two women who'd been enemies learning to share space without animosity. The summer stretched golden and perfect. Lillian's solo exhibition was a success, establishing her as a serious artist. Adrian implemented several of her suggestions for estate management, improving tenant welfare significantly. James continued his work with the farms and even began courting a sensible young woman from the neighboring estate. One evening in late August, Lillian sat in the conservatory working on a new painting when Adrian entered looking pleased with himself. "I have news." "Good news, I hope?" "Excellent news. The irrigation cooperative I've been organizing with the other local estates. It's been approved. We'll be implementing modern water management across the entire region. It'll improve crop yields, reduce costs, and make farming more sustainable." "Adrian, that's wonderful." "It was your idea, remember? When you suggested I stop competing with other estates and start collaborating with them?" She did remember. 6 months ago, reviewing ledgers together, pointing out that shared infrastructure made more sense than each estate struggling alone. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for listening, for being willing to change how things have always been done." "I learned from the best." He pulled her into his arms. "Speaking of change, I have another question for you." "Another proposal? We're already married twice." "Not a proposal. A request." He looked suddenly vulnerable. "I want children with you. A family. Not because the estate needs an heir, though it does, but because I want to see what kind of amazing humans we'd create together." Lillian felt warmth flood through her. "I want that too." "Yeah? Absolutely. Though I want to finish my next exhibition first, and I'm not giving up painting when children come. We'll need a nanny. We'll hire the best, and you'll keep painting, keep exhibiting, keep being exactly who you are, just with small humans running around causing chaos." She laughed, imagining it. Ironvale filled with children's laughter, with art and love and life. So different from the cold mausoleum it had been when she'd first arrived. "When did we get so lucky?" she wondered aloud. "When you got brave enough to take off your ring. When I got smart enough to notice. When we both decided survival wasn't enough. We wanted to actually live." That night, lying in the bed they now shared every night, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From invisible duchess to recognized artist. From frozen duke to devoted husband. From a marriage of duty to a partnership of choice. It hadn't been easy. It had required courage and conflict and the willingness to demand more than mere existence. But it had been worth it. 1 year after Lillian had removed her original wedding ring, spring returned to Ironvale Manor with unprecedented beauty. The gardens bloomed in riot of color, the tenants prospered under fair management, and the Duchess and Duke were expecting their first child. On the anniversary of that pivotal decision, Adrian presented her with a gift, a custom-made paint box engraved with her name and the words, "For the woman who refused to stay invisible." Inside was a note. "My dearest Lillian, 1 year ago, you made the bravest decision I've ever witnessed. You chose yourself. You reclaimed your dignity, your life, your future. In doing so, you saved both of us. I was dead inside, using grief as an excuse to avoid living. You were suffocating under the weight of my neglect. We were two people existing in the same space, but utterly alone. Then you took off your ring, and everything changed. Thank you for being brave when I was cowardly. Thank you for demanding to be seen when I was willfully blind. Thank you for giving me a second chance I absolutely didn't deserve. I love you. Not as a replacement, not as a convenient duchess, but as yourself, complex and talented and strong and utterly irreplaceable. Forever yours." Adrian Lillian pressed the note to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Happy tears this time. Grateful tears. She crossed to the window and looked out over Ironvale's grounds. Her home. Her future. Her life. Reclaimed and remade through courage and stubbornness and the refusal to accept less than she deserved. The invisible duchess had become impossible to ignore. The frozen duke had learned to feel again. And together, they'd built something neither could have created alone. A marriage born not from duty, but from choice. Not from arrangement, but from genuine love. Spring light flooded through the conservatory windows, warming her skin, illuminating the canvas where she was painting their future. A portrait of the family they would become, the life they would share, the love that had emerged from the ashes of grief and isolation. Outside, she heard Adrian's voice calling her name. Not in sleep this time, not murmuring a ghost's name, but fully present, fully alive, calling for his wife. And Lillian Blackthorne, Duchess of Ironvale, artist, survivor, and finally beloved, went to answer. Their story had begun in darkness and silence. It would continue in light and laughter, and the stubborn, beautiful insistence that being alive meant more than just breathing. It meant being seen, being known, being loved. And that, Lillian thought as she walked toward her husband's voice, was worth every moment of the fight to get here.